Writing Matters with Dr. Troy Hicks is a Writable podcast. Find more episodes and subscribe on your favorite platforms. And if you want to learn how to grow great writers, check out Writable.com. In this episode, Troy speaks with Jeremy Hyler, a middle school English and science teacher, a speaker and presenter, a celebrated author and co-author of Troy's, and the co-director of the Chippewa River Writing Project, a national writing project site. Jeremy is an expert in the field of writing instruction and shares with Troy that there is no singular best way to teach writing. For him, it involves unstructured writing time and live modeling of his own work to students, but each teacher must find the method that works best for themselves and their students.
Welcome. Today we get to talk with my friend and colleague and co-author, Jeremy Hyler, who is a middle school English language arts and science educator. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Troy. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your history as a teacher of writing before we dig into the rest of our questions.
Yes, my history as a teacher of writing. Well, I would say that when I first began teaching writing to students, I began in sixth grade. That would be where I really explored a lot of my writing with kids that I was teaching, but it was more of the 5-paragraph essay type writing, and to keep it very kind of structured and organized for students. But over time, I started to develop this sense of I really wasn't doing my students any justice. And I always felt like not only the way it was being taught with a 5-paragraph essay, but the idea that there always had to be this rubric attached to writing for students. And I can get into that whole scenario later in terms of my philosophy on rubrics. But, and over time, I felt like there was something that needed to change. And so, and that's when I applied for the Summer Institute at the Chippewa River Writing Project for the National Writing Project, and actually did that and changed my whole perspective on teaching students writing in terms of the way I approached writing with my students, the feedback that I gave my students, the types of writing that my students were doing. And so over time, it just got much better. And yeah, I mean, where I'm at today is there is no such thing as a 5-paragraph essay in my classroom. Students aren't always writing with rubrics. And writing isn't always just putting, a keystroke onto a Google document. Writing is encompassed. Writing isn't. How do I want to word this? It encompasses a lot of different venues in terms of looking at videos, whether it's a vlog or a book review, or doing a book trailer. Those different types of things. So there's a lot of different types of writing that my student does besides just turning in an essay per se.
That sounds incredible. And I know that your journey has been heavily influenced by the writing project and thinking about concepts of digital writing as well. Mm-hmm. Can you give us just a snapshot? What does your day-to-day life look like in terms of the classes that you teach and have writing involved? And even in science, I know you're using writing as well. So what's just a day-to-day life look like for you in your middle school schedule?
Yeah, it's interesting. I teach 6th and 7th grade, and I teach both 6th and 7th grade English, and I teach a section of 7th grade science. In my English classrooms, we always typically start off with some kind of writing warm-up. At the writing project, it was always called writing into the day. I have rephrased that to writing into the hour because, that's the time that we have is an hour. And I typically, what has transformed for me is I used to have, some kind of writing warm-up. I've always had some kind of writing warm-up in my classroom. But what I've changed is that now it's, I give them a topic and the topic is usually more related to things that we're doing in the classroom or something that may be happening in the real world. But the other level that I've added to that is something that came from the writing project was you don't have to write about this topic if it's not appealing to you. If you just have something you need to get off your chest, whether something happened at home or in the hallways, you can write about that, or there's something you want to write about. Let's take, 5-7 minutes and let's just do some writing. And that in itself has changed tremendously because I have way more students that share their writing and that are really excited about sharing their writing because they have that choice, they have that option. So we usually start with that in English class. And then right now we are doing a research paper. And so we do kind of a writer's workshop kind of motif in my classroom where, I've got some students that are working on researching. I've got some students that are working on doing some drafting. I've got some students that are learning certain skills in terms of how to cite, so I'm kind of bouncing around to different students. So I try to do some things like that with my students in terms of writer's workshop because everybody's working at their own speed, their own level. So I've got to kind of be on my toes in that sense, but it's fun in that way. And then in science, a lot of things we do is we do a writer's note or a science notebook or a science journal in my classroom. And the students use that for lots of different things, not just taking notes. They're using it to ask questions about science, draw pictures. They're using it to help with experimental design projects, different observations that they make within the real world. We use something called the science writing heuristic, which gets them to think on a deeper level with science and ask them some specific questions. There's lots of writing we do. We do comparative analysis type writing in my classroom. In my science classroom, there's lots of different stuff that's going on. Whereas, probably, I would say 8-10 years ago, I wasn't doing any of that in the science classroom in terms of writing. It was more you're taking notes in your science notebook and that's it.
Right. Well, good. Well, it sounds like you are thinking about the use of writing across a variety of different ways throughout the day. And we're going to cut right to it. I know we could be a little more philosophical and talk about all kinds of deeper ideas related to teaching writing, but let's kind of get right to it. Of course, you've probably got a dozen different strategies that are really important to you and useful, and you've even described a few already, but what's your one go-to right now as you think about the teaching of writing? What's the strategy that really resonates most for you and for your students?
I think the one strategy that works well for me and, just as a whole as a teacher and for my students is to actually write and to talk out loud with my students. So for example, if I'm showing them an introduction to a research paper and I'll say, hey, you need to have a hook or some kind of way to grab your reader's attention. So I will actually walk through like what my process is as a writer and show them, what I'm thinking and actually write it out. Like I will make the Google Doc really huge on the screen and show them this is what I'm writing. Here is my thinking. And, when we're talking about thesis statements, okay, so here is what a thesis statement is, and this is what one looks like. And here's my thinking, why I'm writing this way. I think it really helps the students because they see me being vulnerable as a writer. And so they're more willing to take chances and be vulnerable as writers themselves. And it has proven to reduce the amount of questions that I get from my students. But also, I think they respect me more as a teacher because I'm willing to put myself out there as a writer.
That's great. And so just as a quick follow-up, obviously you said a moment ago you do use Google Docs, and so you'll go through that writing and revision process with them in Google Docs. By any chance, do you ever use a document camera or just do handwriting, or are you pretty much a technology enriched word processing type of writer when you're modeling that for your students?
Yeah, when I'm modeling for my students, it's just on the Google Docs. We are a one-to-one with Chromebooks school, and so that's what I use. At least I use the Google Docs part of it with my students. It's just because, it's a process for them in terms of learning Google Docs and showing them different things through that. And they can see, how to, something as simple as indenting, they can learn how to do, they learn how to see that, and, line spacing, different things, and showing them the different icons. So yeah, I'm mostly technology. So I would definitely say that I'm a technology nerd when it comes to that stuff in my classroom.
That makes sense. I have to imagine, though, there are still probably some students who are doing that work right in their notebook and then they transfer over to the computer. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep, they do that. And one of the other tools that they use, and not to go down this rabbit hole, is they've really taken to Google Keep to keep notes on and
Mm-hmm.
stuff, especially when they're trying to document resources and different things. They will use Google Keep, and then they will just transfer that stuff over into Google Documents.
Nice, nice. So then as you're thinking about the role of feedback, both the way that you provide feedback for students in a timely, specific way, also with the technologies that you might employ to provide feedback, and then also, how are you getting students to provide feedback to one another? I know that's always tricky, and we hear about the perils of peer editing and even peer review, and it doesn't always work right. But what role does feedback play in your classroom? How are you offering feedback to students? How are you helping students offer feedback to one another?
I'll start by answering the question of how to offer students feedback to each other. Earlier I had mentioned the idea of Writer's Workshop. One of the things that we do, or I do in my classroom, when we're at the end of drafting and we're ready to kind of turn it in for that final grade, and one of the philosophies I always share with my students is your writing's never finished, but we're going to finish it to the point where you're going to turn it in so you can get an assessment. So Mr. Hyler, can see how you've grown as a writer. We do a writer's workshop where I have different stations, and we have an editing and revision station. And they are providing feedback by reading their partner's paper out loud to them so they can hear their own writing. They're also using that Google Docs to make comments and ask questions about each other's writing. It's easy to have your students in terms of like using the comment section say, okay, you need to provide feedback for your partner. What are some things you notice? What are some things that need to change? But I think the real strategy to use, and I think the real where students benefit the most, is when you tell the writer themselves, okay, so your partner just gave you some feedback, just wrote some comments on your document, your Google document. Now I want you, so that I know that you read their comment, I want you to respond to their comment and tell them, how did you fix that problem? Or what are you going to do to fix that problem? That does two things. Number one, it focuses the students on, yes, they need to make those changes to their writing, or at least acknowledge that there is, that their partner has done something to help them as a writer. And then number two, that I, as a teacher, can see that they are taking their revision and their editing seriously. So those are some ways that students are revising and editing and helping each other with feedback in their classroom. So one of the other things is reflection, where I give the students 2 or 3 questions at the end of when I give their paper back, after I've given them their grade and their feedback. And I have students answer questions about their paper. For example, a simple question might be, what did you do really well in this paper? And then another question, a follow-up question would be, what are some things that you need to improve on for your next piece of writing? And then, again, I'll give you one more example, is why do you think you did really well here? Why do you think you need to work on this? So that comes though after I've given them feedback. In terms of my feedback, if I could come up with an effective strategy for every teacher to have this great way to give feedback to students in a timely manner, I think I'd be a millionaire. But there's no one strategy that's out there that's going to work. You have to find something that works for you. What works for me is that in the grade book, I always give them a check mark that shows that their writing's been collected, so parents know that, hey, they've at least turned it in. And then I usually take anywhere of upwards to a week to 2 weeks to get their papers back to them. But I'm going through them with a fine-tooth comb, and I'm using Google Docs, and I'm making comments. But I'm not negative with my students. What I do is I usually turn something that might be a negative in their writing. I try to turn it into something positive. And how I do that is, instead of saying, oh, hey, you know what? You have a lot of really simple sentences here. You really need to improve as a writer. And instead, I will turn that into a question and say, hey, what are some other ways or other types of sentences that you could use in your writing that could make your writing better? So I'm kind of putting it back onto the student. So I give them that kind of feedback. And again, when they get their papers back from me, they have to respond to some of those comments, especially because I usually give anywhere between 4 to 5 questions to each student. And I do ask them to respond to that because, so many students are so quick to just look at the grade and then they never look at the paper again. Well, that's one of the reasons why they do the reflection. That's one of the reasons why I want them to go through and look at my comments. And then I know that they've gone through and they've actually taken some serious consideration on how they can become better writers.
That's really thoughtful. And I guess I'm curious, and maybe not to put a negative spin on it, but do you find that half of the students take that seriously, 75% of them, 90% of them, nearly all of them? I mean, how seriously do they engage in replying to those comments and then putting that into action in their revision, if you had to put a percentage on it?
Yeah, I would definitely say it's between 75 and 80% of the students. You're still going to get those students that they just don't care. You've got those kids that are just like, okay, whatever. I'm just going to walk through the motions because Mr. Hyler wants me to walk through the motions.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, I think that happens to all of us. So.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and that leads really well into our third question is about what drives you and keeps you motivated to do this work every day. And so if you had to think of a word or phrase that really relates to your work as a teacher of writing and as a writer yourself, what would that be? How do you get motivated? How do you stay focused? What's your mantra that you take with you into the classroom each day?
There's a book by John Gordon. It's titled and it just came out too long ago, and it's the Power of a Positive Team. And in this, he talks about being positive leadership, and what you need to do. And one of the philosophies that I have, and I actually have it written on my it's not written on my whiteboard, but it's a printout I have on my whiteboard. It talks about chasing greatness every day. And so that's kind of my mantra. That's, I'm looking to chase greatness every day. And so whatever I need to do, and if I were to choose one word, and it's a word that I have on my cell phone, it's mentality. We have a choice in terms of what our mentality is every single day. That is my word, because, I can choose to walk into my classroom and be negative, or I can choose to walk into my classroom knowing that I'm going to make a difference in these students' lives. And that's what I try to do every single day, whether it's writing or whether it's some kind of social issue, those softer skills that students need, whatever it is, I try to make an impact on their lives.
And I appreciate the work that you do, having visited your classroom in the past and planning to visit again soon. I know that that's something that you live in the way that you teach every day. So thank you again for all that you do. And as we close our conversation today, what's on your horizon? What projects have you got going? What are the other things that are fueling you as a teacher right now?
The other things that are fueling me as a teacher is we're wrapping up the research paper in my classroom, going to be moving into some argument writing, which is always fun because students don't truly understand what the definition of an argument is. So it's always fun to teach them that. Science-wise, we're looking at doing some more modeling instruction, whiteboard meetings, things like that. And in terms of me professionally, co-authoring a book with Dr. Troy Hicks here, and we're looking at science and literacy, and so that definitely fuels me every day. And so just writing in general, so it's an outlet for me. So any chance I get I can write, then that's what I'm doing, and I love it.
Yeah, I enjoy writing with you, and looking forward to going back to Beaver Island again this summer.
Yes, absolutely.
Workshop again. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy, for all that you do every day for your kids and for sharing some insights on the teaching of writing.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Writing Matters with Dr. Troy Hicks is a Writable podcast. Discover more episodes and subscribe on your favorite streaming platforms, or check out filmed episodes on YouTube. Writable offers more than 600 writing prompts and assignments with a range of feedback and assessment tools to help you build more purposeful, proficient writers. Learn more at Writable.com.